Open your cerebral cortex and shift your lobes into upper beta phase, because you are going to have Bitcoin knowledge transmitted directly into your vestibulocochlear. Your host at Bitcoin Knowledge is Trace Mayer, an early Bitcoin advocate since it cost $0.25, but this is not intended to be investment advice. A doctor of jurisprudence, but this is definitely not legal advice. And an investor in core cryptocurrency infrastructure, including Armory, BitPay, Kraken, and Nitagio, but this is not a recommendation of those services. Here, you get fed via direct mind download with pure and free Bitcoin knowledge.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast. We have with us a special guest, Brock Pierce. Welcome to the podcast, Brock.
Trace, good to be back.
Yeah, good to have you. It's been about a year since the last time we chatted. Now, you're a partner at Blockchain Capital, right? What do you guys do there? What are you guys excited about?
Well, Blockchain Capital is a venture fund that was founded to finance companies building around blockchain technology, Bitcoin in particular at the time. We've got near 45 investments in the space, and we've been doing this for about 3 years. And I founded it along with my partners, Bart and Brad Stevens, who I've been working with for, call it 10 or 11 years now.
Okay. What are you most excited about in the space?
Well, I mean, that's a tough question because there's so much, and it changes so often as you go through. I call it the never what seems to be ending layers of Bitcoin and blockchain technology, and kind of seeing what it can do conceptually, and then trying to figure out those theoretical opportunities to what are the ones that are practical, or most importantly timely, the ones that are kind of ready to be brought to market. Right now, I'm excited on the Bitcoin front about a few things. One is, I think that Bitcoin historically is, its only true utility was as a, sort of a speculative investment. It obviously had lots of potential, that all of us have been excited about for a long time now. But I think that it truly has become a better, faster, cheaper way to send money through some, corridors in terms of from country to country. And it's in some instances better, faster, and cheaper. In some instances, maybe only two of the three. But that's become a material and a real use case. And I know a lot of us have talked about for a long time that, Bitcoin's, I think, the greatest utility was in, sort of the developing world, Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, the places where the infrastructure hadn't existed, and that Bitcoin has the potential to leapfrog kind of the build out of, what we think of as the existing financial system, much in the same way that Africa leapfrogged wired communications. So, in the Bitcoin front, I think the fact that use case is now real and happening and growing is an exciting one. I think in the area of blockchain technology.
Do you have a specific example or two of where there actually is like a better, faster, cheaper use case with Bitcoin? Like maybe one of the companies you're involved with?
Well, one of the companies I'm most excited about right now is Abra, which is going live, and their focus is essentially on turning, it's like Uber, but instead of people driving, cars and picking up potential customers, they're fulfilling remittance orders and delivering money or collecting money. So I'm really excited about that approach because it's one that has the potential to, go international very quickly, meaning, kind of be a near worldwide service. So very excited about them. And the key corridors that, look interesting are obviously the Philippines to the nations where you've got large populations, India, to the Middle East, Mexico to America. And so those are like, call it just some examples of the large remittance corridors, Brazil as well. And I'm seeing, as I look at companies that have been operating in these, through these corridors, I've been seeing very promising results. I mean, you can deliver better, faster, cheaper. And so I think if I'm a migrant worker, working somewhere in the Middle East, and I'm making money to send back home to my family in India, for example, and I figure out I can save 10 or maybe 20%, because again, these are some of the poorest people in the world that are, working very hard for limited salaries. The savings for them are the ones that are the most significant, because the way that Western Union and these companies charge is they charge a flat fee and a percentage. So if you're sending a smaller sum of money, the relative fee to you is much higher. And so if I save 20%, for example, when I make that payment, I'm going to probably tell my friends about it. My friends are going to instantly go, please show me how. And I could see now that it's starting to work, it virally becoming very big, very fast.
Last time I was in Singapore, I went down to one of the malls because James Cox, he wrote a book on Bitcoin. He was kind of my host. And he took me down to this mall, and it was like 7 stories high. And there were hundreds and hundreds of people just lined up outside of these remittance businesses. And I guess that's what they do. Like one of the days, like when they're not working, they go down to the mall and they wait in line for like 2 hours to give them Singaporean dollars to wire back, to send back via Western Union or whatever it is to the Philippines or Bangladesh or whatever. So, I mean, we're talking about not just a tax in terms of money, but also a tax in terms of time, right? And the Bitcoin, things like Abra, you're saying that they're reducing that cost in terms of time. Do you have any examples how that might be working for the actual people using it?
Yeah, well, I mean, with any of these services, let's say I'm sending money back to the Philippines. And in each jurisdiction, the service is different, meaning that in the case of the Philippines, if I send money there, there's already a large and robust and existing, call it money remittance industry. And the way that you pick up that money is you go to a shopping mall and you collect your funds, or you can have that money delivered directly to you. Someone will come on a little motorbike and will knock on your door and say, here's your money. And that's how it works in the Philippines. The issue is once Abra receives that money, they can make that money immediately available to that venue in, call it the Philippines. Western Union doesn't always, sometimes there's like a 2 or a 3 day delay.
So you're talking about when they receive the Bitcoins. So
yeah, they have the ability to make that money available to someone on the other side of the world in a matter of minutes.
Because of the blockchain?
Because of the blockchain instead of a 1 or 2 or 3 day potential delay. And also because the blockchain works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Western Union has, very different, operational hours.
Scheduled maintenance.
Yeah.
Kind of along with that, what do you see in terms of the developers of the Bitcoin blockchain specifically, as opposed to any of the other blockchains out there? I mean, where are they at in terms of expertise, in terms of skill, in terms of just overall usefulness?
When you refer to the developers, you're talking about at Abra, or we're talking about?
I would say Bitcoin Core, since that's the largest, most entrenched project. But I guess we could even compare and contrast the different teams that are out there, like Classic or Unlimited.
I first of all want to thank anyone that is a core developer. I'm chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation, and I can tell you it's a thankless job. And I know that I put in a lot of time and energy, and does everyone here at the foundation. And I think the core developers are in a similar situation. So I would first off like to thank all of them. Anyone that takes the time to contribute to the development of Bitcoin is someone that I'd like to thank, because generally they're not getting compensated for those efforts. And as of late, they're not getting a lot of thanks. So I'd like to thank all of them to begin. Obviously, the Bitcoin Core team, has probably been developing they've been the most active contributors to Bitcoin Core, but I understand why some people in the community are frustrated. And again, this is, one of the problems that you have when you have open source development.
Yeah, people don't just write the code that you want; they kind of write the code that they want.
Yeah,
beggars can't be choosers, right?
and code gets written, and not everyone's going to agree as to the approach that's being taken. And as a result of that, you're going to have a lot of disagreements, and those disagreements are going to be very public due to the nature of this being, again, an open source and open sort of consensus building process. And unfortunately for everybody else looking in, more specifically the people from outside of our community, we look very, very disorganized. And again, that's unfortunate, but that's because people get to see how the sausage is made. My view is that I think that what everybody wants right now is something that's achievable. I think everyone's probably a little tired. I think there's a little bit of fatigue. I think there's probably a fair amount of ego involved, and hopefully we can find a compromise where the collective core developers, not just from Bitcoin Core but Classic and Unlimited, can come together and find a solution. I think probably the best way to do that is to make it a situation where everyone everyone can feel like they won. And what I mean by that is the successor, so call it development organization or developer organization, should probably no longer be called Core, Classic, or Unlimited. Because by going forward with one of those names at this point, it's going to allow some people to feel like they won, and others to feel like they lost. That's going to be, I think, one of the remaining items necessary to make everyone, get everyone comfortable with coming to consensus. So a new name is probably going to be needed. And that way it can be something that is inclusive of everyone. And hopefully the compromise includes, the things that everybody is fighting for. I mean, I think that, all of those things can happen. I think we can see a 2 megabyte increase. I think we can see, SegWit. I think we can see, a hard fork to side chains. I think that the things that everyone cares about and wants can all be achieved. And I think it can be done in a way where everyone's, feels good about the solution. And, I hope that we get there for the benefit of Bitcoin. I mean, we've been, I think, suffering as an industry from what are self-inflicted wounds. But, when this is done and consensus has been reached, we'll be all the stronger for it.
Kind of looking back on your experience as an investor being involved in, what were probably very private boardroom fights, it's almost like this is a public boardroom fight. Could you maybe give an example or two in your own experience where there was like a pretty nasty board fight, but fortunately it was all behind closed doors and the company was able to continue to go forward and be successful once the decision was finally made?
It happens, with almost every company at some point, unless you're, one of those almost one of those elusive unicorns that do nothing but go up into the moon the entire time. Every organization, just like every human being, and every we all go through our moments of ups and downs, and sometimes those situations are going to create conflicts, and sometimes those conflicts are going to result in a lot of fighting and challenging situations, and eventually everyone wants what's best most of the time. I mean, that's the one thing we all need to take a step back and look around and understand. We're all people that believe in Bitcoin. We're all people that have, devoted weeks, months, or years, in many cases, to supporting the ecosystem, whether that be taking the time to learn about it and have the ability to explain it to other people, whether, we all contribute in the ways that we can. And, one thing for, I think, all of us to remember is we're all on the same team at the end of the day. We may have differing views, but we are on the same team.
Well, I mean, is that actually true? Because like Mike Hearn, for example, he sold all his Bitcoins and then he wrote his article about whiny rage quitting. What if he actually went short Bitcoin before he wrote that article so that he would profit financially from stirring up the bad news and having the price go down? I mean, is everybody really on the same team with Bitcoin since we can go short the instrument?
Again, fair enough. As a general statement, I believe that to be true. Yes, of course, in Mike Hearn's instance, as he's decided that he wants to leave and walk away
and front run the market, right?
and which he very well could have, and
he did. I mean, he wrote an article about how he sold all his Bitcoins, and so he sold all his Bitcoins before he wrote the article, which generated all the bad press, and then the price went down like 5% or something.
And by the way, I don't fault someone for doing that if they've made the decision that they want to leave the market, and then they explain the reasoning for doing so. I guess
you don't fault them for
if this were a public company, it would have been a different. That wouldn't have happened in that fashion. If he had shorted the market, and I hope, the next time someone interviews him that he's actually asked that question, I would consider that to be kind of very poor form and, ethically questionable behavior for a guy in his position.
Yeah. So we're 7 years into Bitcoin now. Like, what is the role of it in this overall larger scope of blockchain technology?
Well, I think of blockchain technology has many potential applications. I think of Bitcoin as being attempting to build a non-sovereign form of money. It has obviously other utility beyond that, but I think that's a pretty ambitious effort, if nothing else. And so far, it's succeeding at it in a very small way. We're still only a $6-7 billion sort of market cap, which, in a tech stock is, one very small public tech stock. And when you look at it as a currency or as a form of money, it's minuscule. And we're, all of us are the very early adopters, and, it's arguably still just an experiment. I'm, very long Bitcoin and, believe this experiment is going to continue to evolve into something that starts to be really disruptive. It's not disruptive on any meaningful scale yet today, But I think we're laying all the groundwork. We're building the infrastructure, the bridges, the roads, the tunnels, that will give it the ability for that to happen. And, hopefully at some point in the future, we reach a tipping point. I think it's going to take a while. If you asked me in 2013 or 2014, I would have said, it's going to happen rapidly. As we've been around, the market longer and longer, my views have changed a little bit, and that is that it's going to take a while. And the main reason is I don't know. You've been around Bitcoin for a very long time. When did you first hear about it?
Oh gosh, like pretty much when it started. I mean, I've been around it for a long time now.
When did you acquire your first Bitcoin, from the time that you heard about it to the time that you acquired your first Bitcoin?
Oh, that's quite a pointed question. I'm not sure I really want to answer it.
So, rather than directing the question at you specifically, I'll use this as a more generic thing. When I ask most people, they're going to say, I heard about it in 2011 or 2012 or 2013. Right,
and then they bought it.
I say, what is the first time that you acquired your first Bitcoin, however you got it, whether it be mining or this or that? And the answer is normally 1 or 2 or 3 years later. And then I always say, well, you're, an entrepreneur or a software developer or someone that works within the tech industry. You're forward thinking, you're smart, you're an early adopter of new technologies. It took you days, weeks, months, or years. How long do you think it's going to take for the average Joe, or the average Jane? And that's the thing. Bitcoin is still very confusing to most people, and it takes most people a fair amount of time to kind of reach that aha moment. And so I've been making this argument now for a couple of years that I think a lot of where our growth is going to come from is from services like Abra, which obfuscate Bitcoin from the product, though they're built on top of Bitcoin. Because I think it just takes a while, though there will reach that that so-called tipping point. Again, to use Malcolm Gladwell's terminology, where there's enough of us that all of a sudden it's kind of like, oh, I trust this, I understand it, I don't need to research it to feel comfortable. I now know hundreds of people or thousands of people that are using it. It's hard when you're still at a level that we're such a small community of people. When people start to feel like they're one of the latecomers to an ecosystem and they know lots of people using it, they don't really need to know much to get comfortable. They're comfortable because they know lots of people that are using it. For most people on the planet, they don't know many people using Bitcoin. It's still that kind of mysterious, technology that they don't understand because they, quite frankly, don't even understand what money is.
Yeah, right. Magic, internet money. What about in the next 2 to 3 years then? What about like potential competitors, things like Ethereum? I mean, what do you see its role being, or are they even going to be competitors?
I don't personally think of them as competitors, but theoretically it's possible. I mean, Ethereum, Bitcoin, was built primarily to be a mechanism for the transfer of value. And lots of other ideas have emerged as to what can be done with it, because we're creating immutable records and we can do all sorts of other stuff that I don't need to, I think, explain now. But one of those things was smart contracts, and Ethereum was built. At least one of the core functions or capabilities that it has is to deliver smart contracts. But then you also have things like Rootstock that are attempting to bring that sort of same capability to Bitcoin's blockchain. And then obviously you've got things like Omni. I was one of the founding board members there, and Counterparty and Colored Coins and Open Assets. And there's lots of ways that we can build on Bitcoin's blockchain. But there's not agreement amongst the Bitcoin community whether or not that's a good thing or not. As we talk about scaling, Bitcoin and the block size. If Bitcoin was only being used to transfer Bitcoin and that was its sole purpose, scaling would be less of an issue. Again, there's lots of arguments that can be made there. And do I think that there's going to be many blockchains in the future? Yes. Do I think that there's going to be many currencies like Bitcoin that can be successful, that their role is to be, call it a medium of exchange or a store of value? No, because I think ultimately, we benefit from there being one very strong and successful currency that is the primary means for, call it the reserve cryptocurrency, the world's reserve crypto.
But could we have several of them? Kind of like we have gold and dollars and euros and British pounds and Swiss francs. Like, could we have multiple kind of valuable source of value with cryptocurrencies, like maybe Bitcoin and Litecoin and Dogecoin and Dash and who knows what else?
Well, theoretically, yes, but I don't know if it's going to be so much things like Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Dash. I think what's more likely is you'll have I believe governments are going to issue their currency using this technology in the future. And so that'll look much like the current world we live in, but with just a more digital sort of infrastructure that allows those currencies to move much in the same way that Bitcoin does. In the case of, call it non-sovereign assets, I think that, something like Zcash, certainly has a lot of potential, for, those members of the community that care, about anonymity. But then again, Bitcoin could potentially implement a zero proof, sort of structure into it if, we could reach the consensus to do so. Though I think, and you may have, a truly, you could have an anonymous currency, a pseudo-anonymous currency, and a completely transparent currency. I could see something like that occurring. And then I think that you'll have thousands of currencies that are, that look very similar to digital currency in video games or frequent flyer miles. Again, things like Ethereum, lots of other, call it digital instruments that have value. But I think as a currency, we're probably still best served having one large and dominant one. And as of right now, that still looks like it will be Bitcoin. And, I continue to do what I can to make that so.
Are there any other things that you're particularly interested or excited about that we should be keeping our attention on?
Well, I think what Zuko is doing in Zcash is, certainly something of interest. And if you aren't following it, you should look at it. I do think Ethereum, is something worth looking at. I think of the, call it 650 blockchains or cryptocurrencies or, call it assets that exist out there. Bitcoin and Ethereum are certainly the most interesting. I think that in general, the rest of them are not. But there are a few that are. I mean, obviously, I'm a big fan of Ripple and an investor in Ripple, the company. I'm also, I think what we're seeing right now around storage, could be interesting. You've got 3 or 4 different companies, trying to do things in that area. The zero proof stuff again with Zcash and call it the Dashes of the world seem interesting, and I think that you're going to see a bunch of stuff emerge, being built in and around the sort of the Ethereum ecosystem, and I think a lot of that is also pretty exciting.
Yeah, kind of like Slockit or some of these other things. What about just like totally outside of the blockchain technology? Like what about in like biotech or drones or 3D printing? Like, as we close the interview, are there any other kind of things to tickle the brain?
Well, I'm a global macro sort of person. So, I mean, so far, my meals today have been Soylent. I'm a fan of biohacking. The drone market is, clearly an interesting one. And, I'm a big fan of sort of the Internet of Things. And I do think that the blockchain is going to have a significant impact on all of these things. My firm has been investing in companies recently that are taking blockchain technology to the healthcare industry. We just invested in a company called Tyrion, which is doing some of that. So I think that the blockchain is going to impact all of these industries. And, there's lots of cool stuff going on in the world. VR, AR. I can see the digital assets in those environments becoming, call it put on a blockchain so that they can be interoperable and, they can move from, world to world. We're living through some exciting times. I mean, yeah, it's hard, for those of us that spend, most of our time on Bitcoin and sort of blockchain related activities. That one industry has gotten to a point that it's beyond my ability to keep track of everything going on or to even have any, good sense of everything going on. Trying to keep track of everything going on in the world right now is even harder.
Isn't it exciting though? So I've on the podcast webpage, I've got a page for resources which have all my favorite biohacks. What would be your number one recommendation of a biohack for the audience, for the listeners?
Well, I'll give a shout out to Eric, but he's got a product called Neutro. It's NOOTROO. His nootropic is the one that I've been using most recently, and then just from a dietary perspective, I'm a serious food and wine guy, and so it's odd that I would be promoting Soylent, but I found it to be very useful. If I'm not having a meal that's purpose is a social activity or an artisanal sort of culinary experience. Take today, I've been working all day long. I've had no meetings other than phone calls, and rather than wasting time going to grab breakfast or lunch, I can supplement those meals with something that's very healthy. It's giving me more or less everything the body needs, but in a way that's very efficient. I don't have any dishes when I'm done. I've got nothing to clean up. There was no preparation, and in terms of saving time and call it GSD, I found it to be very effective. So those are, kind of the most active, sort of biohacks that I've been using.
Well, thanks so much for being with us, Brock. We've had a tremendous interview. Brock Pierce at Blockchain Capital. Thanks for being with us.
Trace, thank you again for having me.
Be sure to get a copy of the free Bitcoin Guide at freebitcoinguide.com. Got a question or suggestion? Record your voice at bitcoin.kn. Don't be shy. To help the show, share bitcoin.kn with friends, post about it on Reddit, and otherwise spam the interwebs. Your iTunes comments and 5-star reviews are very important to us. Please continue tuning in to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast, where we release interviews with the top people in the Bitcoin world. Now take some choline and let that Bitcoin knowledge consolidate.